Hi, I'm Jody Hart with Leavitt Machinery. I'm the Regional Service Manager, and today we're going to talk about measuring forks and lift chain. We want to measure both of these items for safety reasons. Lift chain will tend to wear because it's involved in every lift the forklift does, and forks will tend to wear from being slid along the ground. We want to measure these items on each PM or at a very minimum once per year. Today we're going to look at two types of lift chain measuring devices, a plastic lift chain gauge and a percentage of wear lift chain gauge. We're also going to want to measure forks with our Cascade fork gauge. Let's have a look. When measuring lift chain, you are going to want to ensure that you have raised the forks and carriage slightly off the ground so that there is a load on the chain. You want to examine the chain for broken pins, cracks, and stretch or wear. To use this style of gauge, you want to first identify the pitch of the chain, which will be the measurement between the center of pin on one link to the center of pin on the same link. Once the pitch is determined, you will use the indicating arrow according to the pitch at the top of the pin on one leaf. Over a certain determined amount of distance, the gauge for you will measure whether the chain passes or fails. You can see in this example that this brand new machine has a pin well above the indicator mark that would indicate a fail or a chain that is too far worn. When measuring free lift chain, you're again going to want to measure it where it works the most, which will be closest to the roller where you can get the chain straight. Free lift chain will wear out typically a lot faster than lift chain, as it tends to do a lot more of the work, with the forks only going up to roughly eye height before the rest of the mass channels start to move. This type of scale will identify the chain pitch for you, and it will also tell you the number of pins to measure over and give you a percentage from 0 to 3 on what condition the chain is in. To use this type of scale, measure the center pin on one link to the center pin on the same link to determine the pitch. Once the pitch is determined, the gauge will tell you how many pins to measure over in order to attain a percentage of wear reading. You can see in this example with the machine that has brand new lift chain, the wear percentage is 0%. When measuring forks, we want to check the forks for quite a few things. First off, we want to check our forks for cracks, which are most present and most common at the heel of the fork. We want to check our forks for bends, warps, twists, and levelness. Using the Cascade gauge, we can check the forks for bends, as shown here. We also want to check the heel of the forks for wear. The heel of the forks tend to wear the most as operators drag them along the ground on concrete or rock, and it acts as a sanding effect and can wear on the heel of the fork. To check for fork heel wear, we can use a Cascade fork gauge on a pallet fork by measuring the back of the fork with a go-no-go gauge, as you see here. With the gauge, we set the outer contact points to the thickness of the shank of the fork, then moving to the blade of the fork. If the inner contact points don't pass over the heel, then the fork is good. The Cascade tool will also measure the condition of the fork hooks. Another thing we want to check is the fork locating or retaining pins. We want to check to make sure that they move freely and the spring is still intact and working. To measure lumber forks, we will use a caliper. To measure the heel wear on a lumber fork, you need to first identify what the original heel thickness size was. Lumber forks typically range in size and in thicknesses from 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches, and 2 inches at the heel. Some lumber forks can be fully tapered. In this example here, we have an 1.75 inch lumber fork at the back with 1.7 inches remaining at the heel of the fork, which is still within recommended specs. We want to also check the forks for twists, damaged or bent tips, and any possible cracks on the heel or welds. 10% wear or greater on a fork will mean it needs to be removed from service. Now you know how to measure lift chain and forks. Thanks for watching.